Shut that disgusting thing off, now.
Ma'am, I'm just heading out.
I don't care! You stink like diesel and dirt, and you have zero respect for people who actually matter here.
This farm's been here since...
Nobody cares! Your filthy tractor is dragging down every property value on this street. I will make sure you're gone by summer.
I understand you're upset, but this is my...
I just filed a formal complaint with the Indiana Farm Bureau demanding they shut your little dirt operation down. It's done!
She had no idea who she just said that to. That complaint didn't land at some random office. It landed on my desk. I'm the president of the Indiana Farm Bureau, and everything she just said, she's about to answer for every word. My name is Colton Everett, and my family has been farming the same dirt in Hendricks County, Indiana, since 1967. My grandfather bought the first 400 acres, with cash he saved working pipelines in Oklahoma. He always said the soil here was so dark, it looked like God had poured coffee on it. My father expanded to 800 acres, and built the grain bins that still stand along County Road 200 South. I took it to 1,200. Corn and soybeans mostly. Some hay for the neighbors who run cattle. My wife Ellen taught biology at Plainfield High. She could explain photosynthesis to a room of bored 15-year-olds, and somehow make it sound like a love story between sunlight and chlorophyll. She was also the one who pushed me toward the Farm Bureau. "You know this land better than anyone in this state," she said one night on the porch, fireflies blinking out past the bean field. "Go tell them that." Pancreatic cancer took her 3 years ago this past November. Some mornings, I still pour 2 cups of coffee before I catch myself. 18 months after she died, I was elected president of the Indiana Farm Bureau. 28,000 member families, the most powerful agricultural voice in the state. We lobby at the State House, negotiate federal policy, and fight for property rights every time some developer decides a cornfield would look better as a cul-de-sac. When I took the chair, I told the board I wanted 2 things: protect small farms from suburban sprawl, and keep government off our land. They said that sounded about right. Then, Briarfield Estates showed up like a rash that wouldn't heal. A developer named Wade Prescott bought the Henderson farm next door, 460 acres of prime bottomland. Old Bill Henderson was 81, with no children who wanted the work. Prescott paid him $2.3 million, bulldozed the barn before the ink dried, and broke ground on 127 single-family homes. The billboard on Route 36 read, "Country Living, City Convenience." Houses started at $389. The scent of fresh asphalt replaced the smell of tilled earth, so fast it made my jaw tight. Tammy Schaefer moved into Lot 47 in the first wave of buyers. You could spot her from 300 yards on a cloudy day. Platinum blonde highlights shellacked into place, Gucci sunglasses parked on her forehead like a tiara, white Cadillac Escalade that she angled across her own driveway like she was protecting 2 spaces at a Whole Foods. And always, a clipboard tucked under her arm like a weapon she hadn't decided to swing yet. She appointed herself HOA president within 3 months. Nobody ran against her because nobody else wanted the headache. 6 months in, she had a website, a logo, a Facebook group called Briarfield Community Standards, and strong opinions about everything from mailbox paint to the acceptable curvature of garden hoses. Then, she noticed the farm. The first letter arrived in a cream-colored envelope, with the Briarfield Estates logo pressed in gold foil. "Dear neighbor," it began, "we're sure you understand that families with young children need their rest. We kindly ask that you refrain from operating heavy machinery before 8 a.m. Signed by Tammy Schaefer, President, Briarfield Estates Homeowners Association. Title centered and bolded beneath her name like she was ratifying a peace accord. I read it at the kitchen table with my morning coffee. I looked out the window at the same field my grandfather had plowed before Tammy Schaefer was born. Then I folded the letter, dropped it on the junk mail pile next to a seed catalog and an oil change coupon, and walked back outside. 5 in the morning. Same as always. I figured the letter was a one-time thing. Newcomers always need a little time to understand how farming works. You move next to a cornfield, you're going to hear a tractor. That's not a complaint. That's geography. But Tammy Schaefer wasn't the learning type. 2 weeks after the letter, I saw a white county truck pull up my gravel drive at 6:15 in the morning. A woman in a tan polo stepped out carrying a clipboard and a decibel meter. Her name was Officer Brenda Cates, Hendricks County Noise Enforcement. She looked apologetic before she even opened her mouth. "Mr. Everett, I'm sorry to bother you this early. We received a formal noise complaint about agricultural machinery operating before 6 a.m. I shut the tractor down and climbed off. The engine ticked in the cool air. Somewhere behind us, a rooster at Hank Tillman's place 2 miles east crowed like he was personally offended by the interruption. I said, "This tractor has been starting at 5 every planting season for 30 years. She nodded. "I understand, and honestly, sir, you're covered under the Right to Farm Act. This is an established agricultural operation. The statute is pretty clear." She glanced toward Briarfield Estates, like she already knew who had called. "I'll note it in the file." "Appreciate it." She drove off. I figured that was that. It wasn't. Over the next 6 weeks, Tammy filed 14 separate noise complaints. 14. Each one triggered a visit from Brenda Cates or one of her colleagues. Each one ended the same way. No violation found. The officers were polite. They were thorough. And every single one of them burned 45 minutes of my morning while I sat on a tractor going nowhere. That was the trick. She wasn't trying to win. She was trying to drain me. Every visit meant a form to sign, a conversation to have, a break in the rhythm of work that doesn't wait. Corn doesn't care about your paperwork. Then she started showing up herself. I'd be rolling through the east field at 5:10, headlights cutting through the fog, and there she'd be. White Escalade parked at the end of my access road, with the engine running, phone pressed against the dashboard recording video. She never got out of the car those mornings, just sat there in the glow of her phone screen, like some kind of suburban surveillance drone, cataloging every diesel rumble for a case she thought she was building. I mentioned it to Hank Tillman over coffee one Saturday. He laughed so hard, he nearly choked on a biscuit. "Boy, you got yourself a live one. She came by my place last week asking if I could milk my cows quieter. I told her cows don't have a volume knob." But it wasn't funny for long. A week later, I drove past the property line and saw something new. Tammy had planted a homemade sign right at the edge of the subdivision entrance, facing the road. White poster board, hand-painted red letters. Noise complaint hotline. Call to report farm disturbances. Below it, her personal cell phone number. I stopped the truck and stared at it for a good 30 seconds. The paint was still tacky. You could smell the Rust-Oleum in the morning air. Then I found out about the meetings. Every Thursday evening, Tammy hosted what she called the Quiet Morning Initiative in her 3-car garage. Folding chairs arranged in a semicircle, a table with Chardonnay, a cheese board, and printed handouts titled, "Know Your Rights, Living Next to Agricultural Nuisance." She'd recruited 11 homeowners so far. Most of them had moved in less than a year ago. Most of them had never lived within a mile of a working farm. Now here's what most people don't know about the Indiana Right to Farm Act. Indiana Code 3236 says that if an agricultural operation was established before surrounding non-agricultural activities, like, say, a subdivision full of people who thought country living meant a big yard and no traffic, then that operation is legally protected from nuisance claims. Period. Doesn't matter how loud your tractor is. Doesn't matter if you start at 4 a.m. or 3. If the farm was there first, the law says the farm stays. Takeaway for anyone listening. If you buy a house next to a farm and then complain about the farm, the law is not on your side. It's on the farmers. Tammy didn't care about the law. She cared about momentum. She was building a movement the way some people build multi-level marketing downlines, one irritated neighbor at a time, fueled by free wine and manufactured outrage. And I was starting to realize this wasn't going to stop on its own. 3 months into Tammy's campaign, the situation jumped from annoying to something I hadn't expected. I was at the Farm Bureau's state office in Indianapolis, halfway through a budget meeting, when my assistant Jill knocked on the glass partition with a look that fell somewhere between amusement and disbelief. "You need to see this," she said. She was holding a manila envelope, already opened. Inside was a 4-page letter, single-spaced, Times New Roman, 12-point, printed on heavy cream stationery and bound in a clear plastic cover. The title page read, "Formal Complaint Regarding Agricultural Operations, Colton Everett, Hendricks County." I opened it. My own name stared back at me from the first paragraph. The letter was addressed to the Indiana Farm Bureau. Tammy Schaefer had written, on behalf of the concerned families of Briarfield Estates, demanding that the Farm Bureau take immediate disciplinary action against one Colton Everett for, and I'm quoting, "reckless and inconsiderate agricultural practices in close proximity to a family residential community," and exposing children to hazardous diesel exhaust during critical sleep hours. She had CC'd the State Department of Agriculture, the County Health Department, and her state representative. 4 pages of grievances, formatted like she was submitting a senior thesis to a committee that would take her seriously. Jill was standing in the doorway watching my face. The fluorescent light above her buzzed at a frequency that always reminded me of a mosquito that couldn't find skin. I read the letter twice, then I folded it, set it on my desk, and smiled for the first time in weeks. She had just filed a formal complaint about the president of the organization she filed the complaint with, and she had no idea. Let me say that again, because it deserves its own moment. This woman sat down at her kitchen table, typed up a 4-page complaint demanding that the Indiana Farm Bureau punish Colton Everett, sealed it in an envelope, drove it to the post office, and mailed it to the man she was complaining about. If entitlement were a sport, Tammy Schaefer would be an Olympic gold medalist. I didn't respond. I didn't call her. I didn't send a letter on bureau letterhead explaining who I was. I just filed it in a folder labeled Schaefer, slid it into my desk drawer, and went back to the budget meeting. But something in that letter caught my attention beyond the comedy. On page 3, Tammy referenced appropriate zoning protocols and claimed that my farm should have been reclassified during the Briarfield development process. She argued the county had an obligation to transition adjacent agricultural zones into mixed residential once the subdivision was approved. That wasn't noise complaint language. That was real estate language. I pulled up the County Planning Commission's public records that evening from my home office. The screen's blue glow was the only light in the room. I could still smell the coffee Ellen used to brew in the pot behind me, even though the pot had been unplugged for 3 years. Habit is a ghost that lives in the walls. What I found made my stomach tighten. Glenn Schaefer, Tammy's husband, had visited the county planning office twice in the past month. According to the visitor log, he'd inquired about the process for reclassifying adjacent agricultural parcels for potential residential expansion. In other words, Glenn was asking how to turn my farmland into more houses. I leaned back in my chair and let that settle. This was never about noise. This was never about kids sleeping. Tammy Schaefer wasn't fighting for quiet mornings. She was fighting for square footage. If they could pressure me off my land, through complaints, through zoning changes, through sheer exhaustion, Wade Prescott could buy another 400 acres and build another subdivision. Glenn would sell the lots. Tammy would run the new HOA. They were running a play, and I was the obstacle standing between them and a second round of 389 starter homes. I closed the laptop, sat in the dark for a while. The furnace kicked on with a low hum, and the window rattled once against the frame the way it always does when the wind shifts east. Then I picked up the phone and called Hank Tillman. Hank, that woman isn't just complaining. She's trying to take my land. Long pause on the other end. I could hear his dog breathing in the background. Well, he said, then I guess it's time to stop being polite. He was right. I'd spent 3 months treating this like a neighbor problem. It wasn't a neighbor problem. It was a land grab, dressed up in a bathrobe and Gucci sunglasses. And I was done watching it happen from the tractor seat. Tammy Schaefer brought her petition to the Hendricks County Commissioners meeting on a Tuesday evening in late April. She walked through the double doors of the county building like she was entering a courtroom where she already knew the verdict. Navy blazer over a white blouse, pearl earrings, a leather portfolio so thick it could have been a doctoral thesis. Her heels clicked on the linoleum with the kind of rhythm that says, I practice this walk in my hallway. The meeting room seated 120. About 60 people showed up, half from Briarfield, the rest the usual mix of retirees and county watchers who come to every public meeting like it's Wednesday night bingo. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed at a frequency that sat right behind your teeth. Tammy had 15 minutes on the public comment agenda. She used every second. She opened with the petition. 47 signatures from Briarfield Estates homeowners. She held it up for the room to see, like Moses showing off the tablets. These families are begging for relief, she said, her voice cracking with the exact amount of emotion you rehearse in a bathroom mirror. Then came the evidence. Photographs of my tractor, taken from the road, time-stamped at 5:02 a.m. Video clips from her dashboard, shaky but loud. A printed screenshot from a phone app claiming to measure decibel levels. 78 decibels at 600 feet, she announced. That's louder than a vacuum cleaner. At 5 in the morning, in a neighborhood full of children. She paused. Let that sit. The room murmured. Then she pivoted. I have personally contacted the State Agricultural Authority and the Indiana Farm Bureau. She said the names slowly, like it gave her words institutional weight. And I can tell you, they are very concerned about Mr. Everett's operation. I was sitting in the back row. I didn't move. I didn't clear my throat. I just wrote that sentence down in my notebook, word for word, because she had just lied to a room full of people and a panel of elected officials, and I wanted the quote for later. The Farm Bureau had received her letter. It was sitting in my desk drawer. Nobody in the organization was very concerned about my operation. The only concern it generated was whether to file it under comedy or recycling. Commissioner Dale Loomis spoke first. He was a tall man with a soft chin and the nervous energy of someone who owed favors he couldn't afford to explain. Wade Prescott's Political Action Committee had funneled $40,000 into Loomis's last campaign, a fact I had confirmed through public finance records 3 days earlier. I think Mrs. Schaefer raises valid concerns, Loomis said, leaning into his microphone like the extra 2 inches made him sound more sincere. Our communities are growing. We need to explore how existing agricultural operations can coexist with modern residential development. The 2 other commissioners stayed neutral. Commissioner Briggs nodded slowly without committing to anything. Commissioner Yates stared at her water bottle like it contained an escape route. No vote was taken. But Loomis promised to explore the creation of a targeted noise ordinance for agricultural zones adjacent to new residential developments, which, translated from politician into English, meant he was going to try to write a law that punished farmers for farming near houses that were built next to farms. After the meeting, Tammy stood in the hallway, shaking hands. Loomis walked over and squeezed her elbow like they'd just closed a real estate deal, which, given everything I now suspected, they essentially had. I took a photo with my phone from across the lobby. The flash didn't go off. Neither did anything in my expression. That evening, Tammy posted on Instagram. I know because Hank's daughter showed me. The photo was Tammy at the podium, mid-gesture, with the caption, "Sometimes being a warrior mom means standing alone against a machine that doesn't care about your kids. We won't stop." The post had 137 likes, and a comments section full of fire emojis and prayer hands. In her victory celebration, she'd missed one small detail. Nothing had actually been decided. No ordinance was drafted. No vote was taken. The only thing that happened was a politician said he'd explore something, which in county government is about as binding as a New Year's resolution. But Tammy had declared victory anyway. She was popping Prosecco in her kitchen while her husband texted the developer. I could almost smell the overconfidence from 2 miles out. It smelled like expensive candles and cheap strategy. I drove home, parked the truck, and sat on my porch in the dark. The sky over the cornfield was thick with stars, and somewhere east of the property line, a screech owl called out twice and went silent. Hank called. "She's got the commissioner in her pocket. What are you going to do?" I took a sip of coffee. "I'm going to do what farmers do, Hank. I'm going to wait for the right season." The next 3 weeks, I spent every spare hour at the Hendricks County Recorder's office. The building smelled like old paper and floor wax, and the kind of quiet that makes you whisper even when nobody's watching. I went through development permits, zoning applications, subdivision plats, and every document connected to the Briarfield Estates project. The clerk, a woman named Dolores who had worked there since Reagan's second term, started leaving a pot of coffee on the counter for me without being asked. What I found changed everything. First discovery. When Wade Prescott filed for rezoning to convert the Henderson farmland from agricultural to residential, he was required by Indiana Code 36-7-4 to complete an agricultural impact study. The study was supposed to evaluate how the new development would affect surrounding farm operations: dust, noise, chemical application, equipment access, water drainage. It's a standard requirement. Every developer in the state knows it. Prescott never filed one. The county planning office approved the rezoning anyway. Whether that was negligence or a favor, the paperwork didn't say. But the gap was there, stamped and dated, impossible to deny. Second discovery. Buried in the rezoning application, on page 19 of a 23-page document, Prescott had made a binding commitment to construct a 200-foot agricultural buffer zone between the eastern edge of the subdivision and the western boundary of my farm. Trees, hedgerow, graded earthwork, a physical barrier designed to absorb noise and separate residential life from working farmland. It was the key condition the Planning Commission cited when they approved the project. Prescott never built it. Not a single tree. Not a single foot of grading. 127 families bought homes based on a promise that was never kept, and nobody checked. Third discovery. This one hit different. I pulled the official Briarfield Estates HOA covenants, the master document every homeowner signs at closing. I flipped to page 47, paragraph 12C. There it was, in 11-point font buried between a clause about satellite dishes and a section on holiday decorations. The right to farm acknowledgement. It read, "Purchaser acknowledges that adjacent agricultural operations may produce noise, dust, odor, and other conditions inherent to farming, and agrees not to pursue nuisance claims against such operations." Every homeowner in Briarfield Estates had signed it, including Tammy Schaefer. She had put her name on a legally binding document, acknowledging that the farm next door would be loud, dusty, and operational, and then spent 4 months trying to shut it down. Fourth discovery. The Briarfield Estates website listed Glenn Schaefer, Tammy's husband, as the original selling agent for the subdivision. But when I cross-referenced Indiana Secretary of State filings, I found something else. Glenn Schaefer was listed as a 20% partner in Prescott Land Holdings, LLC, the same entity that owned and developed Briarfield Estates. Glenn wasn't just selling the houses, he was profiting from the development. And his wife was using her position as HOA president to create the conditions for more. I sat in the recorder's office with 4 folders spread across a wooden table, so old the varnish had turned amber. Dolores refilled my coffee without a word. Outside the window, a delivery truck rumbled past and shook the glass. I had everything I needed. The developer broke the law. The HOA president signed away her own complaint. Her husband was in business with the man who built the subdivision, and the commissioner backing her campaign was bankrolled by the same developer. I closed the last folder, called Ray Gatewood, general counsel for the Indiana Farm Bureau, from the parking lot. "Ray, I need you to clear your calendar." Ray Gatewood had been the Farm Bureau's general counsel for 11 years. He was the kind of lawyer who wore boots to depositions and kept a framed copy of the Indiana Constitution on his wall next to a photo of his bird dog. When I walked into his office with 4 folders and a thermos of coffee, he looked at me like a man who already knew his weekend was ruined. "How bad?" he asked. 4 violations, 1 conflict of interest, 1 compromised commissioner, and an HOA president who signed a document saying she'd never do exactly what she's been doing for 4 months. He sat down. "Start from the top." We spent 6 hours in that office. By the time we finished, the plan had 4 prongs, each one designed to land at the same time, in the same meeting, in front of the same audience. Prong 1. File a formal complaint with the Hendricks County Planning Commission for Wade Prescott's failure to complete the required agricultural impact study, and his failure to construct the 200-foot buffer zone. Under Indiana Development Code, both were binding conditions of his rezoning approval. Violating them didn't just expose Prescott to fines. It put the legal validity of the entire subdivision's permits in question. Every homeowner in Briarfield Estates had standing to sue Prescott for selling them property developed under false conditions. And here's a takeaway worth remembering. Before you buy a house next to farmland, ask if the developer completed the agricultural impact study and built the required buffer. If they didn't, you're not just living next to a loud tractor. You're living in a development that may not have been legally approved in the first place. Prong 2. Request a formal opinion from the Indiana State Agricultural Commissioner, confirming that the proposed noise ordinance, the one Loomis had promised to explore, would violate the Right to Farm Act. A formal commissioner's opinion isn't law, but it carries enormous political weight. No county board wants to pass an ordinance that the state's top agricultural authority has already declared illegal. It would be challenged in court before the ink dried, and the county would eat the legal costs. Prong 3. Prepare a presentation for the next county board meeting. Not a complaint, not a plea, a case. Certified copies of the HOA covenants with Tammy Schaefer's signature on the right to farm acknowledgement. Certified copies of the missing impact study. Certified copies of the buffer zone commitment. Campaign finance records linking Prescott's PAC to Loomis's last election. Every document notarized, time-stamped, and formatted for projection on the boardroom screen. Prong 4. Contact Nina Hargrove. Nina was a senior investigative reporter at the Indianapolis Star. She covered land use, development corruption, and rural politics the way a surgeon works on a heart, carefully, methodically, and with zero tolerance for people who lie under oath. I'd met her 2 years ago at a Farm Bureau policy forum. She told me once that the easiest corruption to find in Indiana was in county planning offices, because nobody ever expects a reporter to read zoning documents. I called her from my truck in the Farm Bureau parking lot. The sun was going down. A flock of starlings turned overhead like a single dark thought. Nina, I've got a developer who skipped a mandated impact study, never built a required buffer zone, and has a business partner whose wife is the HOA president leading the charge against the farm next door. The county commissioner supporting her got $40,000 from the developer's PAC. Silence for 2 seconds. Then, how long do I have before the board meeting? 3 weeks. I'll make it work. I'll need copies of everything. Already made them. The next day, I started calling the county chapter presidents. 14 of them across central Indiana. Every one of them represented farmers who had dealt with some version of the same problem. A new subdivision, a noise complaint, a developer who wanted more land, a commissioner who owed someone a favor. I kept the message simple. If they can do this to me, they can do it to any farmer in this state. The board meeting is June 12th. Show up. Every single chapter confirmed. Hank Tillman handled the locals. He rallied 12 farmers from within a 15-mile radius, each one with a story about Briarfield or its developer, or some other subdivision that had tried the same play. Hank called it the Tractor Caucus and printed out directions to the county building on yellow legal paper because half of them didn't trust GPS. One last thing. I drove to the edge of my property line where it bordered the subdivision and bolted a trail camera to a fence post. Legal. It was my land, my post, my camera, aimed at my own access road. I angled it so it covered the gate, the gravel shoulder, and about 60 feet of the county road. I didn't tell anyone why. I just had a feeling she'd do something stupid before this was over. Farmers read weather. We also read people. Tammy found out I'd been at the recorder's office. I don't know how. Maybe a county employee mentioned it to Glenn. Maybe one of Prescott's people spotted my truck in the parking lot. Either way, the moment she learned I was digging into paperwork, the nature of her campaign changed. She stopped writing letters. She started breaking things. The first hit came on a Wednesday morning. I pulled out of my driveway at 4:45 and made it a quarter mile before my headlights caught the problem. Someone had dumped 3 truckloads of construction debris across my access road. Broken cinder blocks, twisted rebar, chunks of old concrete with rusty pipes sticking out like bones from bad soil. 6 tons of it, spread so thick you couldn't get a bicycle through, let alone a grain truck. I got out and stood in the dark. The air smelled like rust and old mortar, and the kind of damp that sticks to everything. A piece of rebar pinged against a concrete slab as the pile settled, and the sound echoed off the tree line like a bell in an empty church. The trail camera footage showed 2 unmarked pickups pulling in at 2:14 a.m. No visible plates, either removed or taped over. 2 men worked 12 minutes, dumped their loads, and drove off without ever stepping fully into the frame. They knew about the camera, or at least they thought they did. What they didn't know was that I had a second camera, a smaller unit bolted to a fence post 40 yards south, aimed at a different angle. That camera caught a partial plate on the second truck. I saved the footage on 2 hard drives and a cloud backup. Deputy Keller came out, took photos, shook his head. Not much to go on without full plates, but he noted the debris looked consistent with materials from a residential development site. I filed a report and spent 2 full days clearing the road with a front-end loader and a rented dumpster. 2 days I should have been planting. 2 days, the corn didn't care I was busy. Then came sabotage number 2. Tammy called the Indiana Department of Environmental Management and reported that I was illegally spraying toxic agricultural chemicals within 300 feet of a residential zone, endangering the health of 60 children. The inspector, a man named Garrett Cole, who had clearly heard some creative complaints in his career, tested the soil, checked my application logs, reviewed my spray license, and confirmed I was using glyphosate at legal distances with proper wind speed documentation, everything by the book. He signed off in 40 minutes and told me I was clean. But while he was standing in my field, clipboard in hand, I saw Glenn Schaefer drive past on the county road. Slowly, window down, phone up, filming my farm like he was scouting a property he planned to own. I lifted my own phone and took a photo of Glenn. He didn't notice, too busy performing surveillance to check if he was being surveilled back. A week later, the flyers appeared. Bright yellow paper, bold black text, health alert, toxic chemicals being sprayed near your home, protect your family. And at the bottom, a logo, Hendricks County Department of Health, official seal, official font, official layout. Except it wasn't official. The county health department hadn't issued any alert. Tammy had designed the flyer herself and slapped a government logo on it without authorization. I found them in every Briarfield mailbox, tucked under windshield wipers at the community center, and stapled to the entrance gate bulletin board. In Indiana, using a government agency's seal to create a false impression of official communication is a Class B misdemeanor. Not a gray area, not a technicality, a crime. I photographed every flyer I could find, documented the locations, and saved 3 clean copies in a plastic bag. Then came the performance. The following Saturday, Tammy organized a community wellness walk. 30 Briarfield residents marched along the property line in surgical masks, carrying hand-painted signs that read, "We can't breathe," and "Poison-free neighborhood." A few brought kids, 2 had strollers. They walked 45 minutes in a loop along the road, chanting something I couldn't quite make out from the tractor seat. One problem with the whole production. I wasn't spraying anything. I was planting corn. Chemical application had ended 2 weeks earlier. The only thing in the air that morning was pollen, bird song, and the faint smell of manure from Hank's cattle operation a mile east. I watched from the cab, engine off, windows down. The warm breeze carried their chanting across the field, like background noise at a carnival nobody asked for. She wanted a reaction. She wanted me to shout something she could record, to give her a clip for a tearful Instagram caption. I gave her nothing, not a wave, not a word. Just a man on a tractor, doing the same thing his grandfather did, while a crowd in surgical masks marched past a field of dirt and pretended they were dying. The thing about secrets in small-town Indiana is they don't stay secret. They migrate through church lobbies and feed store checkout lines and the cabs of trucks idling at the grain elevator. News doesn't break in farm country, it seeps. Tammy found out who I was from a magazine. The Indiana Prairie Farmer ran a feature in their May issue. 2-page spread, photo of me next to the John Deere with the headline, Farm Bureau President Colton Everett on protecting Indiana agriculture from suburban sprawl. Standard profile, my background, the Bureau's agenda, my position on right to farm protections. It had been scheduled for months. I didn't plan the timing, but I didn't mind it either. Within 24 hours, my phone rang 11 times. 3 calls came from Briarfield residents I'd never spoken to, telling me they had no idea their HOA president was fighting the president of the State Farm Bureau. 2 sounded embarrassed. 1 sounded afraid. Tammy didn't call me. She called Channel 8 News. The segment aired 3 days later. Evening broadcast, 6 o'clock slot. Tammy sat in her living room, family photos on the mantle, white flowers on the end table, lighting soft as a confession booth. She leaned forward. Her voice cracked at the edges like drywall tape peeling off a wall. She dabbed at one eye with a tissue she'd been holding since before the camera turned on. I'm just a mother trying to protect my children from a powerful agricultural lobby that thinks they're above the law. They don't care about us. They don't care about our kids. The segment ran 4.5 minutes. Local mom versus big ag. One woman's fight for her family. She mentioned the noise, the chemicals, the total disregard from the county. She did not mention the 14 noise complaints that all came back unfounded. She did not mention the right to farm acknowledgement she signed at closing. And she absolutely did not mention that her husband was a business partner of the developer who built Briarfield Estates. Facebook picked it up. 2,000 shares in 48 hours. Comments full of hearts and fist emojis. Someone started a GoFundMe. Help Tammy fight Big Ag. $12,000 in 2 days. Instagram caption. Sometimes being a warrior mom means standing alone against a machine that doesn't care about your kids. In the comments section, buried beneath 300 messages of support, 3 people from Greenfield, Indiana, told a different story. One wrote, "She did the same thing to us. Moved in, took over the HOA, filed complaints against every neighbor who didn't bend. We sold our house at a loss." Another, "Google Tammy Schaefer plus Hancock County HOA. This isn't her first time." Third, "She had my fence removed while I was at work. said it violated setback rules. It didn't. I screenshot all 3 comments before they were deleted, which happened within an hour. Meanwhile, Tammy went straight to Commissioner Loomis and demanded he fast-track the noise ordinance. Special session vote before the regular board meeting. Before I could organize any kind of response, Loomis agreed. He scheduled June 5th, 1 week before the regular meeting on June 12th.
That's when Nina Hargrove called.
"I've been digging," she said. Her voice had that flat, careful tone reporters use when they're sitting on something heavy enough to crack concrete. Your developer Prescott did the same thing in 3 other Indiana counties: Hamilton, Hancock, and Boone. Same playbook every time. Skip the agricultural impact study, promise a buffer zone, never build it, sell the houses, move on. The Hancock County development was where Tammy Schaefer lived before Briarfield. I sat up straight. And Commissioner Loomis received $40,000 in campaign contributions from Prescott's PAC over 2 election cycles. 22,000 of that came in the 6 months before the Briarfield rezoning vote. Through the window, the first fireflies of June blinked over the bean field, same as they always did when the air turned warm and the evening smelled like cut clover. "I need 1 more week," Nina said. "Can you hold? The board meeting's June 12th. The special session is June 5th. Can you be ready before the 5th? I'll be sitting in the front row." I hung up, watched the fireflies, thought about Ellen, and how she always said the best thing about farming was that the land never lies to you. People lie, institutions lie, paperwork lies. The soil never does. Tammy had built her whole campaign on lies, about the noise, the chemicals, the Farm Bureau, her own signature. She'd manufactured a media moment and raised $12,000 on the back of it, but she'd left a trail. 3 counties. 3 developments, 3 broken promises, and a reporter with a front-page deadline was following every footprint she'd ever left in the mud. The Hendricks County Board meeting on June 12th started at 7 p.m. By 6:45, the parking lot was full, and people lined the hallway outside the double doors. The room held 120 seats. 280 showed up. Tammy arrived first. Navy blazer, pearl earrings, leather portfolio, Channel 8 camera crew trailing behind her. Glenn sat 2 rows back, thumbs moving on his phone. The special session on June 5th had been canceled. Nina Hargrove had called Loomis's office that morning and mentioned the Star was running a campaign finance story. Loomis discovered a scheduling conflict. The vote was pushed to tonight. Tammy went first. Same speech, same petition, same cracking voice. But the room didn't murmur with sympathy this time. 200 strangers in farm boots and seed caps stared back. The Briarfield residents seemed to realize they were outnumbered. Polite applause from the first 3 rows. Nothing from the rest. Then I stood up. 200 Farm Bureau members stood with me. The sound of metal folding chairs scraping linoleum filled the room like a thunderclap. The air smelled like burnt county coffee and old carpet. I walked to the podium. Ray Gatewood followed with a rolling cart of document binders and a projector. "My name is Colton Everett. I farm 1,200 acres on County Road 200 South. My family has worked that land since 1967. I let that settle. I'm also the president of the Indiana Farm Bureau. 28,000 member families across this state." Tammy's chin dropped. Just a fraction. Just enough. Mrs. Schaefer sent a formal complaint to the Indiana Farm Bureau, demanding disciplinary action against a farmer named Colton Everett. I held up the letter. The plastic cover caught the projector light. That letter arrived on my desk, because I am Colton Everett, and I am the person she asked to punish me. The room erupted. Laughter, gasps, murmuring that rolled through the crowd like a wave breaking against rocks. Tammy turned in her seat. Her face went the color of skim milk. "But that letter isn't why I'm here tonight." Ray clicked the projector. Document 1. HOA Covenants, page 47, paragraph 12C. Zoom to fill the 6-foot screen behind the dais. The right to farm acknowledgement, in crisp 11-point font. Purchaser acknowledges that adjacent agricultural operations may produce noise, dust, odor, and other conditions inherent to farming, and agrees not to pursue nuisance claims against such operations. Below it, highlighted in yellow, Tammy Schaefer's notarized signature. She signed this when she bought her home. She acknowledged my farm makes noise. She agreed not to file nuisance claims. Every homeowner in Briarfield signed the same clause. Tammy stood. "I never signed that. That was buried. I didn't know what I was." Ray spoke from beside the projector. "Ma'am, that is your notarized signature. We have the certified copy from the county recorder. She sat down. Document 2. Prescott's binding commitment to construct a 200-foot buffer zone. Beside it, a satellite photo from the previous week. No buffer, no trees, no grading. Just mowed grass between the last row of houses and my fence line. Document 3. The missing agricultural impact study. County checklist marked required. Filing record showing nothing submitted. Document 4. Campaign finance records. Prescott's PAC. 2 election cycles. $40,000 to Dale Loomis. I didn't editorialize. I showed the numbers and let the silence do the work. The Indiana State Agricultural Commissioner stood from the third row. He'd driven down from Indianapolis at my invitation. The proposed noise ordinance, if enacted, would directly conflict with Indiana Code 3236, the Right to Farm Act. My office would recommend immediate legal challenge. Loomis's face had gone waxy under the fluorescent lights. His hand trembled against the microphone base. I moved to table the proposed ordinance indefinitely, 3-0. The ordinance died in 9 seconds. Nina Hargrove raised her hand from the back of the room. Commissioner Loomis, can you comment on the $40,000 your campaign received from Prescott Land Holdings? Loomis leaned into the microphone. I have no comment at this time. Nina smiled like a woman who'd just gotten exactly the quote she needed. On the way out, Deputy Keller stopped Tammy near the exit. He was holding one of the yellow flyers in a clear evidence bag. Mrs. Schaefer, using a county agency's seal without authorization is a Class B misdemeanor in Indiana. We've received a formal complaint. Glenn was already gone. Side door. Phone pressed to his ear. Head down. Moving fast. I stood by my truck in the parking lot and watched the crowd file out. The night air smelled like cut grass and warm asphalt. Somewhere across the field, a bullfrog started up like he'd been waiting for the meeting to end before he said his piece. Nina Hargrove's article hit the Indianapolis Star 3 days later. Front page, above the fold. Developer skipped safety requirements in 3 Indiana counties. HOA president's husband was his business partner. The piece was meticulous. Nina documented Prescott's pattern across Hamilton, Hancock, and Boone counties. Same playbook every time. Buy farmland. Skip the agricultural impact study. Promise a buffer zone. Never build it. Sell the houses. Move on. In Hendricks County, the pattern came with extras. An HOA president whose husband profited from the development, and a county commissioner bankrolled by the developer's PAC. The fallout moved fast and hit hard. The Hendricks County Planning Commission opened a formal investigation into Prescott Land Holdings. Within 60 days, Prescott was ordered to construct the 200-foot buffer zone at Briarfield Estates at his own expense. Estimated cost, $340,000. Hancock and Boone County launched their own reviews. By August, all 3 counties had Prescott under investigation. Commissioner Loomis announced he wouldn't seek re-election. His campaign finance records were referred to the Indiana Attorney General's office. He never spoke publicly about Briarfield again. Glenn Schaefer's real estate license was suspended pending investigation. His partnership with Prescott was dissolved. The GoFundMe, $12,000 raised on a television sob story, was fully refunded after Nina's article exposed the conflict of interest. Tammy resigned as HOA president via email on a Monday morning. 2 sentences. No explanation, no farewell post, no Instagram story. 4 months later, the Schaefer house appeared on Zillow. Listed at $395, sold at $362. Below market, below dignity. The day they moved out, I was on my tractor at 5 a.m. Same as always. But here's the part of the story I think about most. After the complaints and the sabotage and the wellness walks and the fake government flyers, 87 families in Briarfield Estates were still living next to my farm. Most had never spoken to me. Most signed that petition because a loud woman in a blazer told them to. They weren't the enemy. They were the collateral damage of someone else's greed. So I did something I'd been thinking about since the night I sat on my porch and watched the fireflies. I created the Hoosier Farm Neighbor Alliance. Free agricultural education days every 3rd Saturday. Families could walk the farm, see the equipment up close, learn what we grow and why we start early. Kids loved the combine. One boy stood next to the rear tire, and his head didn't reach the axle. Some of them had never touched soil that wasn't in a planter box on a patio. I opened a farm-to-table market on the east side of the property every Saturday morning through harvest season. Sweet corn, tomatoes, pumpkins in the fall. Hank brought his eggs. A lady from 2 counties over brought strawberry jam that sold out by 9:15 every single week. And I endowed the Ellen Everett Agricultural Scholarship, $5,000 a year, to a rural Indiana student pursuing agricultural science at Purdue. The first recipient was a 17-year-old girl named Lily Cartwright from Greenfield, Indiana. Her family had been driven out of their neighborhood 3 years earlier by an HOA president who filed complaints until they broke. That HOA president was Tammy Schaefer. Lily found out at the award ceremony. She cried. Her mother cried. I held it together because Ellen would have told me to save it for the porch. These days, I still start the tractor at 5. The fog still sits low. The air still smells like diesel and Indiana clay. But on Saturday mornings, kids from Briarfield run between the corn rows, and their parents buy tomatoes from a man they used to be afraid of. My wife told me to go tell them what I know. I think she'd be proud of what we built. If you've ever had an HOA president or a neighborhood bully try to push you off your own land, drop your story in the comments. And if you want to see what happens when a Texas developer picks a fight with a retired Marine who owns a water well, subscribe and hit that bell. That one's coming next. I'll see you there.
Here's what I take away from Colton's story. Tammy Schaefer didn't lose because she was loud. She lost because she was lazy. She never read the document she signed. She never checked who she was writing to. She never considered that the quiet man on the tractor might be the most powerful agricultural voice in the state. That's what happens when you confuse a clipboard with actual authority. Colton won because he did the opposite of everything she expected. He didn't yell. He didn't post on social media. He went to the county recorder office, pulled the documents, and built a case so clean it dismantled her operations in one meeting. That's the lesson. When someone abuses power, the best weapon isn't anger. It's paperwork. It's patience. It's knowing the law better than the person pretending to enforce it. And look what came out of it. A scholarship in his wife's name. A farm market that held a divided community. 3 counties holding a corrupt developer accountable. If you deal with an HOA president who thought the law didn't apply to them, drop your story in the comments. Share this with someone who needs it. And if you haven't subscribed, hit that button, because next week, a Texas developer picks a fight with a retired Marine who owns the only water well on the road. You don't want to miss it.